Yeah, boom.
Once upon a time, sorry. Welcome back to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Here we are at Hollywood. As you can see, all these bugs have spears in them.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of environmental storytelling here. I walked in here and like there were all these. So this is like the entrance to the Mantis village, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have all these creatures that have been stopped and killed. And then I walked into here and it said Deep Nest. This is where I'm walking into right now. There's a freaking mask thing up there. Bruh. Well. This place gives me the creeps. Vicious little creatures burst out all over the place. The passages are a dark, twisted maze. Unless you're well prepared, I'll urge you to leave. Though, if you're feeling strong enough to descend, would you like to buy a map?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have enough? Oh, yes, definitely. So, fun fact about this, I actually heard a story about someone who went through this area. By the way, I got my lantern out. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
This is why we needed it. But yeah, I actually heard a story because he's the map man. He's normally he's really jolly and he's whistling, and that's how you can tell where he is. He's not happy here because it's scary. So you can miss him and like not realize he's here because you got to just find him. You can't get any context clues. Last episode we were talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and we were talking about how much Mabini hates it for some reason. I don't really know why you hated it so much, but if you'd like to elaborate on that.
I was talking about how I liked Brad Pitt more than I liked Leonardo DiCaprio. But Leonardo DiCaprio had the scenes where he was double acting, I guess.
Yeah.
Playing a character who was playing a character.
I just think that's so like it's just brilliant.
But even some of the scenes when he was interacting with the little girl, that stuff made me forget it was Leonardo DiCaprio.
Right. Yeah, there is a problem with actors that are just a little bit too famous, you know?
Yeah.
Where you're just like, all I see is you. Like, for instance, there's a film that's coming out, or it has come out, about Mr. Rogers, which is not really something we have in Australia. I'm just kind of aware of him through internet culture, I guess.
Oh, is that the one that Tom Hanks is playing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And so I was watching a trailer of it, and I'm like, that's Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
You know, I just look at it and I go, this is Tom Hanks. I do not see him as anything else other than Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And that really sucks, you know. Imagine getting so famous that you actually like just inevitably lose your acting ability.
Yeah.
Well, not ability, but you know, prowess. I don't know.
Well, that the people see you more than they see the character.
Yeah.
It's like Angelina Jolie.
Yeah.
Like she's so famous that you just see her.
Yeah. So you kind of just want to like, I don't know. You want to find that divide of an actor who's real good, but also not like the best actor in the world.
Yeah,
Although I typically find, as you were saying, God damn it, Brad Pitt, he's good enough that you can just like, I don't know. Typically, at least.
You can forget it's Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then sometimes, you know, they even use that to their advantage. There was a really funny moment. Spoilers for Deadpool 2. But there's a guy who's invisible. That's his power.
Okay.
And they're not even sure that he's there half the time. He dies, right?
Yeah.
He falls on an electrical wire.
Oh.
And for a brief second you see what he actually looked like, and it's Brad Pitt. But that's the thing, is like the joke is it's Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt was playing this invisible man who didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I thought that's kind of like really clever. That's brilliant. But even still now, I think that he's probably up there in terms of so super famous and yet can still play roles really, really well. It's a seamless actor. There was another one he was in, Ad Astra. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Ad Astra is also a really good film. I don't know if it'd be your thing, but then again, I don't know if Once Upon a Time in Hollywood would have been your thing. So who knows? Did you like the ending?
Yeah.
It was over the top. Do you think that
it was a bit over the top, but
real life retcon?
But then I thought, well, the rest of the movie isn't like this, so
it's a classic.
I'm okay with
that
it.
is a classic Tarantino move, though, to just like
all of a sudden everyone gets murdered.
Yeah, it's just the
like
final act goes just completely off the
like
wall.
All of Pulp Fiction is like that. It was just like all of a sudden everybody gets murdered.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of murder and stuff in Pulp Fiction. In his more recent works, he kind of keeps it like low down, like kind of quiet and stuff until the end where it just pops off. Like The Hateful Eight, for instance. That whole film is just tension, rising and rising and rising until the very end. There's a huge fucking just murder spree, and same with Django to an extent, Unchained.
The Django.
The Django, yeah.
I was interested in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, how it's about the actors just sort of going after their career and that sort of stuff. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I thought there's a lot of I love the music because I guess I just the sort of music I like is like 60s and 70s
Yeah.
sort of stuff. And so I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the sort of like the vibes that were being given off in a lot of the scenes around that sort of party scene type stuff, and also like the little things like between Cliff and the teenage girl.
The Charlie Manson follower.
Is that what she was?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know.
She took him to their camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, except he'd been to the camp before. Like that's he shot movies years ago.
Well, yeah, that was before it turned into what it was now.
Yeah. Which is what's Charlie Manson?
Charles Manson. That's where he is now. That's where his camp was.
Right.
Do you know the story of Charles Manson?
No.
Okay. You know, a big portion of that film is about Charles Manson.
Right, because I didn't realize that, and they didn't really say it directly, or maybe I wasn't paying attention.
Well, so I was talking about this when I first saw the film. I'll admit I wasn't really super aware of the Charles Manson story. Like, obviously, you know that he's like an evil man. You know,
Yeah.
that's obvious.
Right.
But everyone knows that. But fuck, I didn't actually know the full story, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because, like, if you grew up in that generation or just a little bit older, like, you couldn't get away from that story, right? It was all about it. So it's so ingrained in people's minds, particularly older people, that
Like Quentin Tarantino. Because he's an older guy, isn't he, Quentin Tarantino?
Yeah. He's around that age,
Yeah.
It happened in the
Like he was a kid in the 60s and 70s.
60s, so yeah. But even for years after that all happens, it was like the story was just so well known. Like, it was everywhere. You couldn't. Oh yeah, they bowed to me now because I did not.
You're not an enemy anymore.
Yeah, I can still kill him though. He tried to kill me there. And he took a swipe at me. But yeah, so it was everywhere. Everyone knew the story. It was just Charles Manson. So when Quentin Tarantino made this film, he made it with the implication that everyone knew who Sharon Tate was and everyone knew the story. Everyone knew who Charles Manson was, how Sharon Tate died, what happened, stuff like that. But for people that are a bit younger, like me, I actually didn't fully know the story. And I actually went and I asked my friend, I did ask you at the time, and you weren't sure either, like, what is the full story? And like a lot of people around my age, bear in mind, I'm like almost 24, didn't actually know the full story. And I think that's really interesting to know, because like you kind of gotta know it to fully appreciate the film, in my opinion. And I know that might sound like, well, you watched the film wrong, but like it was really interesting because when I watched the film, there were bits like that I just didn't quite understand. But then when I actually did the research and found out like what it actually was about, I ended up appreciating the film way more. And I kind of want to watch it again just so I can come in with that knowledge. But do you want me to tell you the story of Charles Manson now?
Please.
Please.
Yeah.
All right. I'll do my best. I after I watched the film, I did some research, I watched some YouTube videos, and hopefully I can tell the story correctly. So it's definitely put on a little title card for The Story of Charles Manson. But that might be glorifying a terrible person a bit too much.
So lots of smiley faces, isn't it?
Anyway, so Charles Manson was a deranged lunatic. He was insane. Okay, that's just a fact. Okay.
Right.
He was in and out of jail and mental institutions his whole life. But he spent like literally his whole life in jail and in juvie and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure he was either adopted or his like parents were abusive to him, and they didn't really give a shit about him. He was fucked up, right?
Yeah.
But he one day he eventually made his way out of jail because like he'd done his time and he'd done his service. He had no reason to be back in jail. So they let him free, right? And he ended up starting a cult. He ended up getting a lot of followers. He just spoke, I guess, in a way that was so weird and deranged, but yet spoke to people somehow, right? He had a way with words somehow, and he would get in people's minds. Plus, also, it's presumed that he fed them ecstasy to make them more compliant, stuff like that. He particularly found his way to manipulating and talking to teenage girls because they were very vulnerable, I guess. And at that age, and they were like kind of willing to try new things and sort of, he was very like anti the man, He was like, come join me and we'll have a fun life and we're gonna we're gonna freaking have a new world that's all happy and grand and like everyone will be like basically he felt like a glorified hippie, right?
Yeah.
This was some people fought him as of. What am I trying to say? Yeah, this cult that he started, it grew more and more and more, and he had a few people like you saw in the movie. There was that guy. What was his name? Mason? No, that's Manson. Tex. Yeah, he was one of them. There were a few other notable female people, and they did legitimately kind of take over this abandoned old movie set.
Yeah.
Where they kind of did their stuff. The problem is that other than everything I already mentioned, is that Manson had some pretty bad ideologies and ideas about how the world should be and who belongs in his new utopia and stuff like that. For instance, I don't believe he was a big fan of the Jews. And at one point, I don't know if he did it while he was in jail or not, but he did end up carving a swastika in his forehead. He and one of them was, he also kind of hated the rich and thought that they should suffer, that they don't deserve to have anything that they have, really. So he ended up, after like a few months or years or whatever, after getting all these girls and all these followers and stuff like that, he managed to convince them to essentially go over to one of the rich people's houses around and murder them, really. And unlike what happens in the movie, they do actually get away with it. They go to Sharon Tate's house, and they killed her in a really horrific way. She was pregnant, and they carved out her stomach and then killed the baby and took it out, I think. And like they strung people up from the ceilings and wrote in blood and stuff like that. And so he basically manipulated all these people, young girls and stuff like that, to commit murder on his behalf for what was supposed to be the better future. There was a huge trial about it. It's really interesting. I'm not doing the story justice, and I'm sure there's like a lot of details I'm getting wrong, or at least kind of skipping over. But yeah, essentially the Cliff Notes is that he manipulated these girls and all these people into doing horrible things for him until eventually getting them to literally commit horrific murder. And then they all went to jail, and there they remain. Charles Manson died in jail. I don't know how many years ago. I think maybe 10. But it's kind of interesting. You can see interviews of some of the girls that committed the murder. Old ladies in jail now, and they're filled with regret, but they're also like, I belong here. Their entire lives were just ruined because they decided to follow this insane person. And it's quite interesting because they really thought that he was almost like a new messiah, and whether or not that was because of the potential drugs that he fed them. So and then the film was made with this idea in mind.
Or in the background of the story.
Well, it was happening in the background, and that's why there's so many scenes of Sharon Tate just kind of hanging about and having a good, happy life. Because if you don't know the story, because I didn't at the time, it's just like, why do we keep cutting to it? Why are we watching her do this? What does this have to do with the story at hand? It's because it's setting up a scene. The idea is that you have that meta knowledge of who she is and how she died and what's going to happen. Right. And every now and then you even see Charles Manson in the film. So when Brad Pitt's character is like working on the roof, and he looks down, he sees an ice cream truck, and he sees the man, and he waves at him. That's Charles Manson.
Because that guy gets out of the truck and goes to Sharon Tate's house.
Yeah, he's kind of scoping the place out. You don't actually see Charles Manson that much in the film, but he's in it. So the idea is like you're supposed to have that meta knowledge of like this is what's going to happen, and that fear of like, oh man, Sharon Tate's having such a happy, beautiful life. It's such a shame what happened to her, but actually,
What was that?
That is what appears to be me. I do know what that is. But it's a scary thing. Forgot that you encountered that here. Oh boy.
Is it like the sax?
Oh, this is nice. Well, that's a lovely place to end off this episode. Story about a notorious psychopath and a nice hot spring, and a thing that looks just like me. All right. See you guys next time. Bye bye.